All right, so you just got a new camera and you want to learn how to get the most out of it. This video is for you. Got a new camera, you've opened it out the box, you're excited, but you don't know where to start. Here are a few things that you should know right out the box to help you get started. You have basically what they call the triangle. Okay, so that's basically 3 settings that help you get the right exposure. All right, so you got the shutter speed. All right, so the shutter speed controls how fast the shutter, like the mechanical shutter in the camera, opens and closes, right? So you have a whole bunch of numbers, slow to fast. It depends on what you're shooting. If you're shooting sports, you want a higher shutter speed. If you're shooting portraits of people that aren't really moving, then you can have a slower shutter speed, right? So as you see, the higher your shutter speed is, the darker your image gets. The lower your shutter speed is, the more light, the lighter the image gets. So you kind of have to find a good balance with that depending on what you are shooting, all right? And this will all come to play in a minute when we bring all 3 of these together. All right, so number 2, your aperture. Basically, your aperture controls how much light is let in, and it also controls the bokeh, or like how sharp your image is, right? So right now I'm shooting at a 2.8 aperture, right? So that's the lowest my lens can go. And there's some lenses that do 1.2, 1.4, 1.8, 2, all these things, right? And then you could open that aperture up to 8, 16. I think mine goes up to 22 or 24. It just depends on your lens, right? So one thing to note about aperture is if you like that blurry background vibe, then you want a lower aperture. If you're wanting more of the background in focus, then you have to increase that aperture. So maybe you want 8 or 10 or something like that. Okay, so aperture is definitely a preference for most people. It just kind of depends on what you want your images to look like. I'd advise you to kind of play with that, kind of see what you need. One of my things that I like to do is, if I need the light for something like sports, then it's going to be at 2.8. If I'm shooting a family outside and there's a lot of people in the family, then I want to open it up to 8 or 10 to make sure that everybody in the line is in focus. A quick tip that I kind of learned the hard way: if you have a lot of people that you are shooting for an event, and maybe they're kind of behind each other and you're kind of like stacking them up. Think like a choir, for instance, right? You got people on different rows. You need to increase that aperture to make sure that everybody's in focus. If you're at a lower aperture, the first row will be in focus, but as you go back, the people will start to kind of be out of focus. So if you're shooting, multiple people in a line, or if you have, choir sort of situation, you need to open up the aperture to make sure everybody is in focus. It just kind of helps the images look a little better, a little crispier. So that's kind of how I gauge aperture. There's not a right or a wrong way to do it. It just kind of depends on how you want your images to look and feel, right? So there's times where I like to close down that aperture and be at the lowest I can be, like a 1.4 or 2.8 or whatever, and the images looks really good. The background is really blurry. And then there's times where if I'm in the studio, I want to crank it up to 8 or 10, make sure the subject, whoever I'm shooting, is in great focus, and it just kind of looks good. The skin looks good. It just kind of depends on the situation that I'm in. So I really do like to play with the aperture. All right, so third, you got your ISO. All right, so the ISO is basically like a setting on your camera where you can kind of add artificial light in a sense, right? So if you turn your ISO up, then you will get more light in the image. But as your ISO goes up, then the grain in the photo, because it's like basically creating artificial light, so the grain in the photo goes up, which in my opinion is a look. It just kind of depends on the look that you're going for. A lot of times I try to keep my ISO as low as possible. When I'm shooting sports, that's kind of hard, right? Because I have to turn up my shutter. So I want to be between 1250 and 1600. That's just me, my preferred. My aperture will be at 2.8, but my ISO might be at 3200 to make sure that I have enough light to capture the moving subject. You know, basketball moves fast, so you gotta have a fast shutter, which decreases the light. So it's kind of like a nice little fine balance, right? So you're kind of trying to balance how you want your images to look, and you kind of have to play with the numbers to kind of keep, you know, things in check, right? So those are the 3 tips. Those are the 3 main things that kind of you need to know about your camera to kind of get you started. All right, so a 4th one that I feel like people don't really talk about is white balance, right? So this is kind of the afterthought. A lot of people set their camera to auto white balance, which is great. If you're shooting in RAW instead of JPEG, then you can kind of alter that white balance in post. But one thing that I want you to think about is kind of getting it as close as right in the camera. That way you have less to edit later. So, you know, play with that. You know, you have all these different auto white balance or white balance settings in your camera. Find one that you like. I particularly like Kelvin. I like to go in and kind of dial in the white balance that I want, which, you know, just kind of helps me later. So I typically shoot in Kelvin, and that just kind of helps me get the images as close to right in the camera. That way I just have less to edit later. So why would you want to adjust the white balance? For me, it's all about skin tones. Sometimes, you know, you're shooting outside and it's really bright. Sometimes you're shooting at blue hour and things are really blue. I just kind of want to make sure that my skin tones look right. That way, again, I have less work to do later. And then it just depends too, you know, sometimes you'll go indoors and you have this kind of like orangish yellow light, and then sometimes you get those bright LED-ish light bulbs that are just kind of like a soft white. So I just like to be able to play with that and just kind of get it the way I want it. That way, like I said, it saves me time later. Okay, so quick little adjustment makes all the world. And yeah, so these are kind of just the things that get you started. This is just part 1. We're going to dive into some other stuff in the next part of how to use your camera. And we'll probably do like a video part, you know, just to do, you know, talk about the video stuff, video side. So those are the things that you get right in the camera. So the images look good. You can kind of play with them to figure out what kind of vibe that you have, whether it be a shallow depth of field, or maybe you have the background crispy and just sharp as well. It just kind of depends. So let me know if you have any questions or anything down in the comments. I hope this helps. And until the next one, see ya.